That weekend, he did research online on how to be Asian and began crafting a persona that incorporated all the major elements of Asianness imaginable. His first move was to use Tai Chi and meditation. In gym class, Mark Porter shouted in pain as his back seized up from trying to do a pull-up. As he writhed around like a grub on the cushioned mat, while the rest of the class and the gym teacher stared at him in fascination, Henry gravely walked to Mark and stood over him. He clapped his hands loudly once to get everyone's attention, then proceeded to rub them really fast, like he was trying to warm them up. Mark looked up at Henry, puzzled, but still making appropriate sounds of pain. "I will now use Tai Chi to help your back feel better," Henry said, and closing his eyes, he proceeded to move his arms in a dance-like motion a la Mr. Miyagi, pretending to shoot waves of chi into Mark's back. A moment later, Mark stopped groaning. "I think I feel something," he said, keeping his eyes on Henry. "Usually you do Tai Chi on yourself to relieve stress," Henry explained. "But if you're really one with the life force, it's okay to use it on others. What I'm doing here is redirecting positive energy to your back while at the same time pulling away the evil energy." Henry shook his head slightly as he concentrated with his eyes closed. "It's working," Mark said. Henry opened his eyes. Everyone, even the gym teacher, was looking at him like he was some kind of Zen wizard. By the next morning, circles were forming around Henry wherever he went. Students wanted to see him perform Tai Chi again, but they were hesitant. Finally, a kid asked if Henry could help his strained wrist feel better. "I only have a certain amount of chi to work with each week." "Maybe next week," Henry said. "But," the student protested. "I said, be ready for you next week," Henry shouted, imitating the angry Chinese dry cleaner who yelled that exact same grammatically incorrect sentence at his dad anytime Mr. Lee tried to pick up his dress shirts. Some of the students didn't believe in Henry's magical Tai Chi abilities, so in homeroom he decided to prove them wrong. Extending a stiff index finger, he zapped one of the betta fish in the bowl on Mr. Parsons' desk with a dollop of invisible chi. Nothing happened. "The fish is fine," a skeptic noted. "Not so, young grasshopper," Henry said, lightly patting the kid on the back. "I just used chi to scramble its internal organs. You'll see. In a few days, that fish will be dead." Sure enough, a few mornings later, the students arrived to find one of the betta fish lying sideways at the top of the water. Everyone was convinced that Henry was a Tai Chi master. No one seemed to remember that before Henry's zap, betta fish seemed to die every few days since they didn't have long lifespans to begin with. The kid with the wrist injury approached him again for his services. "It seems pretty serious," Henry said, feeling the kid's wrist. "We might need to do some acupuncture. I don't have my needles with me, but why don't you go sharpen a half dozen pencils and we'll see what we can do about this wrist pain you speak of." The kid raced off without a moment's hesitation, and Henry was taken aback. Wasn't the threat of getting punctured by pencils enough to deter this patient? The kid returned, clutching a handful of newly sharpened pencils. Wait, are those lead pencils?" Henry stalled. "Yeah, no, that's not going to work. Let's just stick with the Tai Chi." Pretending to know stuff was exhausting. Henry almost fell asleep in English class. The teacher shouted for him to wake up, and Henry, startled at first, glanced at his peers before explaining, "I wasn't sleeping. I was meditating." The teacher rolled her eyes, and Henry leaned over to James Murphy to whisper, "I used my meditation to visualize tomorrow's multiple choice quiz. Choose B when you don't know the answer." This, of course, hadn't come from meditating. The B strategy was something he'd learned about multiple choice questions when his parents had forced him to take a PSAT training course the summer before. The best part about amping up his Asianness was that he got to spend time with Marcy Spatucci. Because he was bad at math, Marcy didn't learn how to do the problems correctly. When she failed her next quiz, Henry shrugged and said, "I guess you're going to have to work harder at it." She begged Henry to be her full-time math tutor every day after school. "You're not like the other boys," she said, smiling shyly at him. 2 more failed quizzes later, and Marcy finally realized the real reason he was different from the other boys. He was really, really bad at math. And something of a compulsive liar. She promptly fired him, or dumped him, depending on whom you asked. However, others had noticed them spending time together, and by the end of the year, people seemed to see Henry in a whole new light. In fact, nobody called him Ching Chong anymore. Summer came and went with more SAT prep. When Henry got to Renham High, he was ready to take his role of Super Asian Man to the next level. Unfortunately, he ran into a problem. There was one other Asian student in the high school, Timmy Nguyen, valedictorian of the senior class, which changed everything. The whole student body now regularly mistook Henry, mistakenly or intentionally, what difference did it make, for this Nguyen fellow, even though the senior was Vietnamese and looked nothing like Henry. The guy even had a full mustache, and Henry hadn't even started shaving. Upper-class nerds shoved Henry into the lockers, assuming that A, he was Timmy, B, he was a curve buster just like Timmy, even though Henry was bombing his classes and hurtling toward a decidedly un-Asian low GPA. His own former classmates from middle school ignored him again, since being unquestionably Asian was not considered cool at Renham High. One weekend, Henry's parents rented the movie The Departed, in which 2 white actors, Leonardo DiCaprio and Matt Damon, played foes. As they watched the crime drama together, Henry was stunned to discover that his parents had mistaken the 2 actors for the same person. They were convinced the movie was a psychological thriller about one white guy who had multiple personalities warring with each other in his head. "Hold on," his dad said, pointing at the screen for the dozenth time. "Is he the good cop now or the bad cop?" Suddenly, Henry was beyond mad. His white classmates thought all Asian guys looked the same, and his parents thought all white guys looked the same too? Was he the only person on the planet who noticed that people of the same race weren't all twins or clones? "You guys are racist," Henry shouted, and ran upstairs to his room. His father eventually followed him upstairs and sat next to Henry on the edge of his bed. It was equally uncomfortable for them both. When his father asked what was wrong, Henry explained everything, from when he'd first started school in Renham to now, when everyone was mistaking him for Timmy Nguyen. Mr. Lee thought about this for a minute before responding. "Well, things could be worse," he said. "For instance, take this Timmy Nguyen person. Imagine the poor guy being mistaken for you." This failed to cheer Henry up, so his father thought about it some more. "Maybe if you give classmates something to identify you, they don't think you're someone else," he said. "Besides, you need to do more extracurricular activities so you can stand out to admissions commissions at Ivies." Clearly, his father was still trying to get Henry to become the cliché Asian son he'd always wanted. But Henry decided to take his advice anyway. The next morning, when his homeroom teacher asked for a volunteer to help a classmate read a scene for drama club auditions, Henry raised his hand. After hearing Henry's line reading, the classmate encouraged him to try out for the play. At the audition, everyone was stunned at how good an actor Henry was. "Do you have any experience?" the drama teacher asked. "Not really," Henry said. But he realized this wasn't entirely true because ever since moving to Renham, he'd been acting. Wasn't the definition of acting pretending to be somebody you weren't? "You're a natural," the drama teacher said. And so, just like that, Henry finally found himself a full-fledged member of a group. After tryouts, they headed for the late buses where they ran into the JV wrestling team, who shouted, "Drama queens!" and "Fairy losers!" The actors were furious and shot back insults, but not Henry. He smiled blissfully, repeating the taunts in his head as if they were the most beautiful sounds he'd ever heard. Drama queens, fairy losers. The plural was music to his ears.